Welcome to a new episode of Chess TV jammed with the best from the chess world. Professor Ronny Johansson is back with a new chess historical episode, and Alfred and Adriana analyze the opening in the Rajabov-Swidler match from the 2012 World Blitz Championship. Albert continues with his observations between chess and Machiavelli's theory of power, and we of course also have a chess puzzle with a checkmate in 3 moves. But before it's time for Albert, I thought I should take the opportunity to tell you that the Chess Olympiad is now finished, and it was the Armenian national team who took the gold in the 40th Chess Olympiad in Istanbul, Turkey. It is the nation's 3rd Olympic gold, and with players like Levon Aronian, Tigran Petrosyan, Gabriel Sergisyan, Vladimir Akopyan and Sergei Movsesyan, it's not that unexpected. Ideally, to win medals at a chess Olympiad, the team should not lose a match, but nobody went undefeated in the 11-round event in Istanbul. The outcome was decided not by how teams won their matches, but by the timing of their losses. Every time some team jumped into the lead, they were knocked out. Those who lost early could still recover, and the drama continued into the last round, and when it was over, Armenia won 9 matches, lost 1 and tied 1. They had the most match points and the best tiebreak. Russia finished in 2nd place with the same match point but worse tiebreaks, and Ukraine took the Olympic bronze, so congratulations. And before the Chess Olympiad started, the German chess club Satrank Club 2000 arranged an internet match between a team from Cologne and one from Istanbul through internet. And despite an unexpected thunderstorm in Istanbul which resulted in internet problems, the international match could start. The friendly match was played over 10 tables and ended after many twists and turns to the Istanbul team's advantage with 5.5 points to 4.5. So we thank Güven Manay for the information, and now it's time for Albert. So here we go.
We usually don't reflect over if we want to be seen as cruel or merciful. Most people nowadays live spoiled in the luxury to be able to just be yourself. Yes, it's actually a luxury to be able to follow your conscience and your ideals almost undisturbedly. A prince, on the other hand, or actually just anyone with power, can't just do what he pleases. For a prince to reach his noble and merciful goals, he might have to live with hundreds or even thousands of lives on his conscience. But to understand why, let's start from the beginning with what Machiavelli teaches us about cruelness and clemency. Machiavelli says that a prince should strive to be considered as merciful and not cruel. But it's not as easy as to just be merciful. Machiavelli mentions Cesare Borgia, who with his cruelness organized Romagna. And Machiavelli even says that if you think about it, he was a very merciful prince. The clemency of the more gentle princes created disorder with murder and robbery as a consequence. Borgia, on the other hand, gave Romagna peace and loyal subjects. The question about clemency counter cruelness leads to another question, namely if it's better for the prince to be loved or hated. Machiavelli says that people are generally ungrateful, fickle and false, that they shun the danger and pursue money, that they are on your side as soon as you give them anything, that when you don't need them to, they offer you their blood, their possessions and their children, but when you really need them, they riot. For the modern humanist, this way of thinking is unthinkable. But the struggle for power is a game of life or death, both for the prince and the subjects. Therefore, the prince can't rely on the people's love for him. But if there's anything he can count on, it's the subjects' fear for the punishment. Machiavelli says that a prince should strive to be feared, but still not hated. And he avoids the hate, as Machiavelli puts it, by keeping away from the subjects' possessions and women. When a prince commands his forces on the field, he should never care if he is considered to be too cruel. Machiavelli mentions Hannibal as an example who achieved great success partially because of his inhumane cruelness. The Roman politician and general Scipio, on the other hand, perished due to his excessive clemency. His clemency even led to that Lockery was plundered by his own legate, and by not punishing them for their arrogance, he even damaged his reputation and honor just more. So Machiavelli says that a prince should avoid to be hated, but that a wise prince should only rely on what he himself can control. People love according to their own will, but whereas they fear according to the will of the prince. A situation on which we can apply this wisdom on is the one in Iran. The situation with the development of nuclear weapons is getting tenser, and it will eventually force USA to act to protect their ally Israel that has been threatened by Iran. USA's current president Barack Obama pursues a considerably milder and more merciful foreign policy compared to his predecessor George Bush, and that was more or less the reason Obama was given the most prestigious and honoring Nobel Prize for Peace. When Bush declared war against terrorism, he threatened with either you're with us or you're against us. The question is if Obama, who is so to speak, a beloved leader, have the same power in foreign affairs to protect Israel. A more balanced climate in foreign affairs is maybe preferable, but Machiavelli tells us that a cruel prince, as for example Cesare Borgia, actually can bring more peace and less suppression compared to what happens when countries' fates are handed over to a gentle, merciful and beloved princess.
Welcome to a new episode of The Opening School. In our last episode, we analyzed the opening played in a game between Carlsen and Grishuk, two brilliant players. And in this episode, we'll take a look at a game played between top grandmasters Timur Radyabov and Peter Svidler. The game was played at the World Blitz Championship this year, and it was an interesting game where Radyabov sacrificed a pawn in the opening and managed to retain the initiative during the entire game.
Radyabov opened up by playing the very versatile move knight to f3, giving black free roam to play almost anything. Svidler settled for g6, against which Radyabov played e4. This was followed by d6, d4, knight to f6 and knight to c3. By now the opening has developed into the Perk defense. White has chosen a rather solid central development.
Many white players are tempted to develop the c or f pawn because of black's low resistance in the center. Of course, there's nothing wrong with pushing these pawns forward, but in doing so, you leave your center sort of exposed, helping black to create opportunities to shatter the white center. So many actually prefer other solutions, just like Radyabov did in this particular game.
Radyabov decided for a more solid variation and stayed content with only pushing forward the d and e pawns. Svidler continued by playing the natural development move bishop to g7, which was followed by bishop to e2, castle kingside, a6, a4 and b6.
In positions like these, it might be hard to decide how to continue. As white, you've already succeeded in capturing the center, but at the same time you also know that black can challenge you for it and maybe even recapture it. In this position, Radyabov decided to use his development advantage and more open position by going for the attack instead of waiting around and trying to stabilize the position.
Radyabov sacrificed a pawn by playing e5. Moves like these are often avoided since they open up a lot of squares in the center, but here white decided to act because he knows that black's development will be explosive in its attack against the white center. White also knows that this may be his last chance to use his development advantage, and that the only way to do that is by giving up the center.
Svidler accepted the sacrifice by capturing on e5, after which white recaptured and black played knight to g4. White now played h3, after which an exchange on e5 followed. The exchange opened up the possibility for white to develop his bishop on c1 by placing it on h6. In this position, many would feel tempted to exchange queens. Black is a pawn up after all, but that would leave almost all of Black's pieces inactive, giving White compensation for the pawn.
Instead of capturing on d1, Svidler chose to play bishop to g7, after which White played queen to c1. This last move protects the bishop on h6, keeping the pressure on the Black position.
As we see here, we've reached a point in the game where it's quite dangerous for White. The position is equalized. White has to fight and keep up the very aggressive play, because if he were to slack off for a second and let Black stabilize his position, Black will no longer be under any immediate threats, and what's more, he'll be a pawn up, an advantage that can often be big enough to win an entire game.
There is a reason why Radjabov is considered one of the best players in the world. In the actual game, he managed to keep Svidler under pressure, and their game is a perfect example on how to utilize your advantage as White in this position.
So if you have the chance, make sure to check that game out. And with that, we'll end this episode of The Opening School. We hope to see you again next time.
Well, then it's once again time for the chess puzzle here on Chess TV, and we will continue with White's triumphal procession with a checkmate on Black in 3 moves. Good luck! Black is actually better here from a material point of view. He has a piece more against 2 pawns. In addition to that, he also has a tremendous pressure on our king, and it is only our queen who saves the king from an abrupt execution right now. But not even the queen is safe in this position. The knight on e7 threatens her and is really forcing her to move. Since we don't want to lose the diagonal to c2, maybe we should move the queen to e4. But let me just say it at once, it is completely wrong strategy to try to protect the queen by escaping from the threat and still trying to keep c2. No, we need to take a break here and just forget that we are totally infested and not let the panic take over. We simply need to think rationally here and solve this puzzle with the tools that we have acquired during our years as chess players. So let's therefore take a look at our attack on Black, and we just have to note that we really managed to build up a strong pressure, and we just need to exploit that. We also know that we really should check in the first move to prevent our queen from being captured, but also to stop any kind of development of the Black attack. So how do we check here? Let's not check just to check, but instead use our 2 strongly positioned pawns on e6 and g6 and our knight on g5. An initial check must then be followed by another check and finally a checkmate. Therefore, we can immediately rule out such moves as queen b5 check because we do not have a good continuation after that. So what we play is queen f7 check. Black hasn't any other choice but to capture the queen with the bishop, on which we of course capture back, but with which pawn? If we choose the e-pawn, we release the d7 square, which we obviously don't want to do, so we capture Black back with the g-pawn and with a check. The king is now forced to go to f8, and then we end this game with knight to h7 checkmate. So what you should learn from this puzzle is mainly that even in the most complicated situations where everything looks impossible, there is hope. So never give up and make sure to fight until the last move. And with that, it's time for some chess history with Arne Johansson, so here you go.
In the previous program I talked about a painting that I saw in Copenhagen this summer, and that had coupling to several recent culture events in the form of a new movie, a book and an exhibition. On our way down to Copenhagen, we also stopped at the small city of Vimmerby, where we probably were the only tourists that did not visit the Astrid Lindgren world. Instead, I spent the time there digging after facts about the rather mystical Erik Norén from Vimmerby, who produced an early Swedish translation of Philidor's work. But I actually visited Vimmerby and its square, where I met Astrid Lindgren herself, as can be seen here. Almost exactly 5 years ago in this program I talked about this translation, which exists in the form of a handwritten manuscript looking like this. It's an ambitious piece of work. The title page is nicely illustrated and the contents comprise about 200 pages and starts like this. Norén probably used the 1791 edition of Philidor's book when he produced his translation in 1810. One should remember that up until 1810 the Swedish chess literature consisted only of Königstedt's little booklet that then had appeared in 3 editions. Norén's manuscript was ambitious, but it was never printed as a book. In the context of this manuscript, one has so far only mentioned that Norén had been mayor of the city of Vimmerby. He also wrote a short note in the Stockholm newspaper in 1803 about a new German chess book, and he analyzed the chess problems of Stamma and wrote a long letter about this to the leading chess players in Stockholm. The end of that letter looks like this, and was dated in 1810. How did it happen that he seems to have known the chess players in Stockholm? And what else could be found about him, I wondered when I now was in Vimmerby. With some help from a librarian, I started digging in the documents and local Vimmerby literature. To start with, I found that he actually was not mayor when he wrote his chess texts. That was much earlier. He started as vice mayor in 1759 to 1760 and worked as mayor for 21 years between 1762 and 1783. But maybe we should start our description of Erik Norén by stating that he was born in 1732 as the son of the Karlskrona district court judge with the same name, Erik Norén. Hence, he was 30 years old when he started as mayor and only 51 when he retired from this position. But he lived until 1811 and thus became 79 years old. We can conclude that his chess texts were produced towards the end of his life. Norén lived in the central parts of Vimmerby, and in 1782 his house burnt down. But in accordance with the tradition, the financing of the reconstruction of the house was taken care of collectively by the leading citizens of Vimmerby. As mayor, he was also responsible for the local court, and in one of the local books from Vimmerby, an episode is documented where he took part in putting out a fire in the actual courthouse. A not so serious case that he took care of in the court proceedings was one of careless driving on a street in Vimmerby. A woman had been knocked over by a horse and sleigh that had been traveling at high speed on the wrong side of the street. As I understand it, there was a rule of left-hand traffic at that time, and there were no sidewalks. He was also engaged in an initiative to get the house for the school headmaster renovated. He had complained bitterly about the fact that rain and snow was blowing in through the door directly into his bedroom. It became a long affair with many letters written back and forth. The practicalities were also a bit more complicated at that time. Timber was cut and turned into new floorboards for him, but they had to be dried for a year before they were put in place. During the period as mayor, Norén was also a member of the Swedish Parliament during the periods 1769 to 70 and 1778 to 879. During the later session, the Parliament treated the question about women who became pregnant outside marriage. This often led to harassment of the woman in question and had in some cases resulted in the desperate action from the mother to even kill her baby. The King Gustavus III wrote a proposition to the Parliament where he argued for assistance to women who had ended up in this situation. It is actually quite an interesting reading with a rather modern flavor to it. It was probably during these Parliament sessions that Norén became acquainted with the Stockholm chess players, which could explain why he in 1810 wrote a letter to Djurberg and the other leading chess players in Stockholm about his chess thoughts. Well, with that we leave Norén and his chess texts, but we'll return in the next program with a new theme, so see you then.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of Chess TV. We are of course back again on November the 5th, so have a good time until then. Bye!